And now, marine weather around Alaska. Hello, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Sunday, September 22nd, 2024. We'll start out looking at the sea ice. Not much out there along the Beaufort Sea coastline or the Chukchi Sea line of Alaska, but as we go out to the west of there, the Russian Arctic coast does have a fair amount of ice in that vicinity. No signs of it making any progress our way, but nevertheless, we do have a colder northerly wind flow through the Bering Strait on the west side of the state as a strong low takes shape in the western Gulf. So this is going to pull down some colder air and perhaps allow for some early season ice development to begin to occur. We are really at that point right now. We just passed that typical climatological time frame of the year where we have reached the minimum ice extent for the warm season. And looking at where the low is late tonight, early Monday morning, we have a low down around 975 millibars just east of Kodiak Island, entering up through the southwestern Gulf. This low will have storm force winds east of Kodiak Island outside of Cook Inlet and on the east side of the Kenai Peninsula on up to Hinchinbrook Entrance. This frontal system will continue to lift north and eastward, bringing areas of moderate to locally heavy rain to the Panhandle and along sections of the Gulf Coast, along with windy conditions. Farther north, patchy snow remains parts of the Brooks Range and up there along the north slope. But this is going to be the predominant weather feature for early week. We expect this low to begin to fill a bit to 980 millibars by Monday afternoon. Broad circulation around this low is keeping brisk northwest winds along the west side of the state, across the eastern Bering Sea, and then coming across the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula. And into Tuesday, the low continues to fill with the central pressure rising back up above 990 millibars, and we have a couple of dissipating fronts or just remnant troughs with some areas of rain and rain showers continuing. This system, as I said, will gradually weaken as we go through the course of the midweek, but potentially some periods of moderate to locally heavy rain will continue, not just this Sunday night, but all the way through midweek into Wednesday and areas of the Panhandle and northeastern Gulf Coast in particular. So looking at what we have coming up Monday, marine forecast for the inner channels of the Panhandle: south-southeast winds 25 knots, gust 35 knots there, Dixon Entrance, with waves as high as 8 feet. Otherwise, 4 5-foot waves, Stephen Passage on up through Lynn Canal. For the outer coast, south winds to 25 knots off of Craig, Sitka, Gustavus, turning southeasterly 25 knots outside of Yakutat to Cape Suckling, with waves running 12 to as high as 15 feet. For Tuesday, winds come down across the inner channel, south-southeast 15 to 20 knots. Waves still running 4 feet there in the inner channels. Dixon Entrance area south of Metlakatla there, 9 feet. And for the outer coast, south winds generally near 20 knots off of Craig and Sitka, with swells 15, 16 feet continuing out. West of Gustavus as winds become more southeasterly with waves running 13 to 16 feet. Now along the northwestern Gulf, we're going to have that low center down in this vicinity. So we have east winds, Prince William Sound to 20 knots, waves 4 feet. We have, as we go down through Cook Inlet, north to northwest winds 30 knots there off of Anchor Point and at the entrance of Cook Inlet, with waves 10, 11 feet. And then on Tuesday, those winds come down further as the low begins to fill. East winds to 20 knots within Prince William Sound, 4-foot waves. Southeast winds 20 to 25 knots with 9 to 10-foot waves outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance. Winds 10 knots out of the north, upper Cook Inlet, but northwest to westerly 30 knots there near the entrance of Cook Inlet, with 7 to 8-foot waves. On Monday, generally northwest winds across Kodiak Island all the way down the length of the Alaska Peninsula, right near 30 knots, though they could be as high as 40 knots there east of Chignik and south of Akiak, and waves generally running 7 to 9 feet on the North Pacific side, 8 to 10 feet on the Bering side. And for Tuesday, winds continue generally northwesterly at 25 to 30 knots. Again, waves 5 to 8 feet along the North Pacific side and upwards around 8 to 10 feet on the Bering side. And across the Aleutian chain Monday, the eastern Aleutians will see Northwesterly winds 25 to 30 knots. Those fall off to 15 knots Atka west through Adak and then become variable around 10 knots between Kiska and Shemya. And for Tuesday, winds further come down across the Aleutian chain. We're looking at north-northwest winds at 20 knots around Dutch Harbor. But as you get west of there, Nikolsky, all the way through the central Aleutians to areas north of Adak, Kiska, and toward Shemya, variable winds at just 10 knots. And then along the southwest coast, we have northwest winds to 30 knots within Bristol Bay, north winds to 30 knots out of Kuskokwim Bay, north to northwest winds 25 knots from St. Matthew down through the Pribilovs, and then along the wider expanse of Norton Sound down along the lower Yukon coast, north winds to 25 knots, waves generally running 5 to 6 feet there. And for Tuesday, winds continue out of the north-northwest, right around 25 knots along the southwest coast, extending all the way from Bristol Bay on up into Norton Sound. Waves generally running 5 to 6 feet, with northwest winds 15 to 20 knots out there toward the Pribilovs and up to St. Matthew. Through the Bering Strait on Monday, north winds to 30 knots, including on the north side of St. Lawrence Island, waves 7 to 9 feet. Lower Chukchi, look for north-northwest winds right around 25 knots. North winds 20 knots there from Wainwright up to Utqiagvik and east to Prudhoe Bay. Westerly winds 15 knots with 4 or 5 foot waves there around Kaktovik. And then on Tuesday, northwest winds 15 knots around Kaktovik, but easterly winds 15 knots Prudhoe Bay. And once you get Utqiagvik down through the Bering Strait, we're looking at north winds 20 knots increasing to 25 knots through the Bering Strait, with waves generally running 4 to 6 feet through the lower Chukchi Sea and as high as 6 to 7 feet along the west side of the Seward Peninsula and especially the north side of St. Lawrence.